Jesus, He knocks today. Do not delay, but open your heart to Jesus. Open your heart. Open your heart. Open your heart to Jesus. He knocks today. Do not delay, but open your heart to Jesus. You got to remember that that's going to be our theme song for the whole series. So take heed to that. Thank you. And maybe I should introduce our speaker, Mr. Mike Baca, Anthony Baca. Come on up, Mr. Baca, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Alright, so my name is Anthony Baca, and I am the director of the Small Bible College called Tools West. I've been teaching there for about 10 years. I'm the Sunday school church youth director. And I love the Bible, I love Jesus, and I think faith are what
Amen. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead. Thank you.
In our presentation entitled Case for a Creator. So this is what we're going to tackle this evening. It's what I'm going to try to share with you tonight, because in this world, I believe all of us are looking for truth. I think we would all agree with that. We want to know what is true. And isn't it so difficult to know what's true today? I mean, you have Fox News, you have CNN News, and you have every news in between. And it's so hard to even know what's true today, even in our own towns, isn't it? Even in our own state, what's really going on. It's so hard to know what is true. And we really just want to know what is true. And in this world, on this journey of looking for what is true, it seems like there's so many pit holes and pitfalls along the way that we kind of stumble and fall as we're looking for this. I began a journey asking one primary question. One question that I knew would change my life. Does God exist? And on that journey, I came across this word. Now, I will tell you, for the longest time, this was my least favorite word. When I was an atheist, and you can imagine, when I would debate a Christian, it would always end the same. Always end the same, without fail. You just need to have faith. Now, the challenge with that, as a logical, rational human being, is they were asking me to do something and believe in something without an evidence or proof for the thing, just because they're saying that's the right thing. Now, do you see how a logical, rational human being would have a problem with that? Yes or no? Yeah, so I had a challenge with this notion of just have faith. So when I began to actually look into the Bible for the first time, and I looked into many religions, by the way, but when I began to look into the Bible, I noticed it says something in Isaiah 1:18. Someone pointed this out to me. God actually says, come let us reason together. If there was a designer who created you, then that means he created your mind. And if your mind was created by this creator, if he wanted to interact with you, he would do it through the level of the mind in which he created. Are you following my thought process there? So when I realized that the Bible was saying, come let us actually reason together, let us think together, let us be rational, logical, not emotional human beings, and make a solid decision based on the facts. I'll tell you what, that appealed to this old atheist. I said, hey, at the end of the day, I want to just know what is true, and I will follow truth, the facts, wherever they go. Doesn't matter where they go, that's where I will go. And so that was what I began on my journey. So these were we're not covering everything, trust me. I spent years looking at this stuff. But we're going to cover just a few brief points that I think were potent for my understanding of the existence of an intelligent designer. First is going to be the law of biogenesis. I promise this will not be like your biology class. I promise you. I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. Number two, we will look at biological information. Number three, we're going to look at the philosophical argument of the law of first cause. Number four, we're going to look at the law of design. And then number five, we'll look at the philosophical argument of the law of the moral argument. So let's dive in. Law of biogenesis, the easiest one of them all. All this law states, and we understand this intuitively, is life comes from life. I mean, I just finished my pre-med. I was just accepted to a couple of medical schools. I love the sciences. They're great to study. Biochemistry just is amazing. It blows my mind. And there's one thing you kind of learn over and over again. Living things come from living things. That's just kind of how nature works. I think we all know this, right? It's funny how we have to come up with these fancy names for things that we just kind of intuitively know. The law of biogenesis. What does that mean? Well, that's living things. Yes, we know this, right? But that implies that it is impossible for something that is living to come from something that is non-living. So this is kind of the premise that if life comes from life, then living things must come from living things. Therefore, in order for you, a living thing, to exist, you must have actually had an origin of something that was living. Are you tracking me? Are you so possible? Again, this is just kind of restating it. Living matter only comes from pre-existing living matter. I am alive. Therefore, I have come my parents. Let's go with my parents. Let's go with my parents. Okay. Yeah. You guys are like, it's a trick question. Here's like biology class all over again. All right. I came from my parents. Where did my parents come from? Okay. And where did their parents come from? All right. Now, you see why I call it the never-ending question? Because you have to follow that train of thought all the way back to some origin, some point where it either began or it has to go back to birth and then continue to now. So that ultimately, if you believe there's an influence to when the universe began, and we're actually going to cover that later, if you believe there's an actual influence, like there's a starting point to when life began, then something had to cause us to exist. Therefore, that thing itself must be alive. The implication is that we cannot have this come from immaterial things. So what is the living thing that started the whole process? We can't just be a combination of atoms and chemicals and of reactions. We had to come from something that was actually alive. Science doesn't have a definite answer for this. The Christian answer was quite simple. When you follow the genealogy all the way back, it says, which was the son of God. So ultimately, the thought is, if living things come from living things, then the origin of the universe is have living things must have originated from someone that was itself alive, imitating. It's more logical to believe that a being caused the universe to exist, or more distinctly, us to exist, versus this chemical reaction. Okay. Number two, biological. See, it was easy, right? All right, good. Number two, biological evidence. Biological evidence. Now, this one is very fascinating. Here it says, as scientists began to decode the human DNA molecule, they found something quite unexpected. An exquisite language composed of 3 billion genetic letters. One of the most extraordinary discoveries of the 20th century. So DNA, understanding DNA. So here it's saying that this was one of the greatest discoveries in the 20th century. The fact that our DNA is composed of these 4 genetic codes, 4 genetic letters, that are put together in such precise ways that it causes you to be you. In other words, if you were to scramble up the order of those letters, of the DNA code, you would no longer be you. You might be a dolphin or something. Are you tracking with me? You'd be something different, right? Because this is the information that tells, what proteins, and I'm not going to go into the details, but what proteins to synthesize to make you, to make you the being that you are today. You cannot change that code. And in fact, when we have these diseases that are causes of mutation within that code, or let me restate that. When there's mutations or changes within our genetic code that does take place, that's usually the result of disorders and diseases such as cancer. And so, whoa, that got loud. Yeah. Is that too loud for you guys? Is it echoing up there? Yeah, because that got loud for me. So if it's loud for me, I'm assuming it's loud for you. Are you guys good though? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Maybe they'll solve the echo back there. Okay. Let's continue. Next slide. Scientists have found the genetic code has all these key elements. The coding regions of DNA, explains Dr. Stephen Meyer, have exactly the same relevant properties as a computer code or language. So in other words, when they look at DNA, what they actually see is the most sophisticated software code that exists in the universe. In fact, you might recognize this name, Bill Gates. You familiar with Bill Gates? Founder of Microsoft, which I don't think any of us function without Microsoft in any of our jobs today, said that DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than anything we've ever devised. So one of the brightest minds when it comes to software development says this is like a software code that even the brightest minds have not even come close to. Now, question. When you look at this, the fact that it appears to be a written language, a software code, when you see something so precise that if a few of these letters were misaligned and out of place, you would cease to be you, it then asks the question, well, what caused that code to be in such a perfect order that you became you? Now, if you came across Microsoft Word, would you think that somehow by accident, Microsoft Word just came out of nowhere? What would you think? Someone what? Someone clearly had, it's too sophisticated of a code to have, for, what if I told you, yes, the entire Microsoft package, Excel, Word, all that stuff, a chimp put it together by just smashing on the keyboard. You would probably think that's ridiculous. That's not even possible. Yet it's even more ridiculous to say that our DNA, which is more complicated than Microsoft, happened by accident, as if some chimpanzee just put that code in some random order. Are you tracking with me? And again, it's not like 5 genetic letters were in the right order. It was over 3 billion of these genetic letters in the correct order. It demands that there was an intelligence behind our code. The Christian answer is quite simple. All things were made through him, that's God, and without him was not anything made that was made. So the Christian thought is, if it looks like someone wrote a code within your DNA, it's because someone actually wrote a code within your DNA. You tracking with me so far? Very good, very good. Number 3 is going to the cosmological argument. This is probably the one I spent the most of my personal time studying. Most of my research went into this particular argument because it was so fascinating to me. Mostly because I like philosophy. I was super introverted. I love poetry. I would just sit there and look at the stars and like muse all night, just think all night. And so when it came to philosophy, I love philosophy. This argument's going to have a little bit of the philosophy, but then it's going to be grounded in science. So let's take a look at it. The law of first cause is quite simple. It states that if something began to exist, then something caused that thing to exist. So for example, we have this box of tissue right here. I think we'd all agree at one point this box of tissue did not exist, correct? But now this box of tissue does exist. So when I hold this up, you assume someone did what? Yeah, someone made this box. Because if this thing had a beginning point, then that means someone had to make it. That's all this argument is saying. If something began to exist, then something had to cause that thing to exist. Let's look at this room, for example. I think we would agree. I don't know how old this church is, but let's just go far. Let's go 1,000 years ago. Did this church exist? Okay, this church did not exist 1,000 years ago, but the fact that it exists today means what happened? Yeah, something caused it to exist, and those would be construction crew, builders, or something of this nature, correct? Okay. So, here's the thing that's fascinating. The thing that causes it to exist must itself transcend the thing that now exists. Let me explain. Someone built this room, correct? But question, if they built the room, are they stuck in the room? So the fact that you create something doesn't mean you're now bound to the thing. Are you tracking with me? A person made the tissue box, but they're not stuck in the tissue box. Because if you cause it to exist, that means you must be outside of the thing that you created. Are you tracking with me? Okay. So not only if something began to exist, something caused it to exist, but the something that caused it to exist must actually be able to transcend or step out of the thing that now exists. So just a little philosophical. But it'll make sense in a moment when we put it to a practical use. So the premise is that if the universe had a beginning, then something caused the universe to begin. And if something caused the universe to exist, the thing that causes the universe to exist must itself be able to step outside of the realm of the universe. In other words, it must be transcendent to what we know as the material world. Now, again, this was all speculation and philosophy for hundreds of years. It was a beautiful philosophical argument because for most of recorded history, it was believed that the universe was what we call static. In other words, the universe had no beginning and had no end. That the universe was this vastness that went on forever. Now, could you imagine trying to wrap your mind around that, right? Goes on forever. However, in 1991, the COBE satellite made what was known as the discovery of the century. Michael Turner from the University of Chicago said it was unbelievably important. They have found the holy grail of cosmology. Stephen Hawking, which you might know this name, he's passed away now. I believe he passed away in 2018, but prior to his passing was considered the brightest mind in the world. Stephen Hawking said, It is the discovery of the century, if not of all time, referring to what the COBE satellite discovered. Here we go. George Smoot from UC Berkeley. He was the COBE project leader. He said, quote, what we have found is evidence for the birth of the universe. It's like looking at God. What the COBE satellite found was data that indicated a cooling universe, this radiation dissipation within the universe, indicating that at one time the universe was hotter and that it was cooling. And based on the data that it also analyzed, the universe was expanding and it was growing. And as it was growing, it was cooling. That meant, so I want you to track me. If the universe is growing, if you were to rewind time, what would happen to the universe? It would, yeah, because what the COBE satellite discovered is we have an ever expanding universe, and that the objects in space are actually moving away from a central point at a speed proportional to the distance. So we know the universe is literally growing. So you rewind time, the universe would actually be until you come to a point of origin, or what they call the point of density, when all things kind of came into existence. Stephen Hawking, again, one of the brightest minds of the world prior to 2018, his passing, he said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning. This was something that Einstein hypothesized with the general law of relativity. That was the premise of that law, an ever-expanding universe. And he empirically verified it for himself by using the Hubble telescope. And he was able to measure the objects in space moving away from us at a speed proportional to their distance. So this was something Einstein himself had already verified with the telescope, but the COBE satellite had brought a definite nail to the coffin. The universe had a beginning. At one point, the universe did not exist, and now it does exist. Therefore, something had to cause it to exist, but the thing that causes it must be able to transcend it. So if we have a materialistic universe, the thing that caused it must itself be immaterial. Are you tracking the thought with me? Again, the answer, and it's a fun answer in science, like I told you, pre-med and going to medical school, and the big theory is the Big Bang concept. Have you familiar with the Big Bang? Yes? Yeah, it's this idea that there was nothing and there was a combustion and created stars, and it's not that it created everything, but it's like created stars, and these stars that were hot were able to produce these hydrogen atoms, and as these hydrogen atoms would heat up within the star, then you would get helium, and as helium would heat up in the star. I know you don't know all this, but anyways, the point is the star would then produce atoms like a machine and produce atoms and produce atoms. But the problem is, remember, life must come from life. Law of biogenesis, already premised that. So if that is true, we already talked about that one, then the thing that caused it must actually be alive. And that's where the Big Bang Theory falls short, because this idea of the Big Bang is that it's a materialistic concept, but we must come from a living origin. So science does not have an answer in conjunction with the law of biogenesis. The Christian answer is quite simple. In the beginning, God created. A living, intelligent designer put it all together. All right. If you have questions, again, please ask me afterwards. I love these concepts. I'll make them again, these are the simplified versions of these concepts. So, all right. Number 4, teleological argument, big word. Just call it the evidence of design. We're in Arizona. You might be familiar with what this is. No, it's not the best picture, but what is this right here? Yeah, the Grand Canyon, right? Now, if we were just walking, and let's say you've never been to the Grand Canyon before, right? And we both came to the Grand Canyon. I said, yeah, this was formed by water. It was kind of random. There was water, and it kind of, you see the river in the middle, kind of carved its way through the canyon, and it was random. People didn't really do this themselves. Would you believe that could happen by just random chance? Yeah, probably, because there's no real symmetry to it. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? You've been there? Yeah, and there's no real distinct symmetry to it. It's very random. kind of chaotic, very jagged, and it's a beautiful canyon. But yeah, you could agree that, yeah, water could have just did that by itself. Now, there's a lot of theories on the Grand Canyon, but we can at least say that just kind of happened somehow. Now, in contrast, if we come across this mountain, and I told you that water ran over this mountain for 1 million years, and once it dried up, that's what was there. How many of you would believe me that happened naturally? Yes or no? All right. So, but the Grand Canyon, that could happen naturally, right? It's kind of jagged, random, no rhyme or reason to it, just kind of a cut down with the river. This one, if you saw that, what would you automatically assume just by looking at it? Yeah, someone did that. Someone made that. Like, that did not happen by just mere water flowing. One we would say was natural. One we would say was by design. The fourth argument we're talking about is the idea of the argument of design. That we live in a universe that looks like Mount Rushmore, not the Grand Canyon. Let's look at it. Again, Stephen Hawking, again, I know he is an atheist, but was one of the brightest minds. And so I read a lot of his books myself. Again, I was a former atheist for most of my life. And so I was very familiar with a lot of his work. So I like quoting him, but I do it for these reasons because he speaks to some of these points. So Stephen Hawking has estimated that if the rate of the universe's expansion, remember the universe is expanding, right? Had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million. The number we probably can't fully fathom, but it's a very, 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 very small number. The universe would have recollapsed into a hot ball of fire due to the gravitational attraction. So let me explain. Remember at the beginning, I said the universe had that point of density, just right? Now again, Big Bang, you want to call it that? God said, let there be stuff, and there was stuff. Either way, it had a point of density. That's pretty much a fact that we know today. The speed and the momentum of that moment was at the perfect speed that all these objects that are now expanding away from each other, that have their own gravitational pull, if this speed was not what it is, if it were just a little slower to a number we can't fathom of how small it is, that gravitational pull would have been so strong, everything would have collapsed right back together. In other words, everything in space is moving away from everything else in space at the perfect speed. Any slower, it wouldn't be that life would be improbable. Life would literally be impossible. There would be no universe. There would be a ball of fire in the vastness of space. Here's another one. Davies calculates that the change, in the strength of gravity or of the weak force by merely 1 part in 10 raised to the 100th, again, this super small number, would have prevented a life-permitting universe. So what this individual, Davies, is describing in his book is he's speaking to gravity on Earth, specifically, gravity on Earth. That if gravity on Earth were just a little bit stronger, it's not that you would be unlikely alive, it would be impossible for large sentient beings as large as we are to exist. We would literally be pancakes. We would be crushed by the gravitational pull. However, in his book, he also demonstrates that if it were slightly weaker, gravity would not be strong enough to actually keep pulling everything, our solar system, into its orbit, and our actual solar system would dissipate out into the vast space. Again, if gravity were just a little stronger or a little weaker, life would literally be impossible. It wouldn't happen. Robert J. Strahl, the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, refers to this as the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. And what is he referring to? The fact that there are over 40 parameters in our universe that are known to us in physics, that if these parameters were just out of place to the minutest degree, life would literally cease to exist. We would cease to exist as living sentient. Maybe bacteria might have lived, and that's about it in some of these situations. Another example, if we were just a little bit closer to the sun, what would happen to us? We would literally burn. If we were a little further from the sun, what would happen to us? If our moon was off from its actual position from us even slightly, our tidal waves would be completely different. In fact, much of the land might be covered still by water to this day. There are so many parameters in physics. And I love physics, but it gave me the biggest headache as a pre-med. There are so many parameters in physics that demonstrate the universe was fine-tuned. That it is so fine-tuned, it's like looking at a massive Mount Rushmore. It demands that someone had to have done this. As an atheist, what did I believe prior to this? Because this was something I knew from science. Well, simple. Multiverse theory. A billion, trillion, quadrillion universes exist, and we happen to be the lucky raffle, the lucky one that happened to get it right. Until someone asked me, where did the universes come from? I was like, that is a great question. I don't know. So again, science, to answer the fine-tuningness of the universe, there is no answer. The Christian answer, again, is quite simple. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He established it. He created not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. We live on a planet that is fine-tuned for you to be here. Literally fine-tuned. And the Bible says that it's because there was a creator who, with foresight and intelligence, designed it with sentient beings in mind. The moral evidence. Probably one of the most powerful evidences when I was studying this out for myself as an atheist, weighing out the existence of God. So let's dive into this one together. So the thought here is quite simple, that if God does not exist, then objective moral values cannot exist. So let me explain this concept. And I'm not saying that moral values cannot exist, because we have subjective moral values, correct? In certain homes, we have those subjective moral concepts, but there are objective moral concepts. In other words, they are things that it doesn't matter who you are, what culture you're from. There are certain things that you know as a human being that when you see it, it's just wrong. Or that when you see it, it's just good. So an example, without using horrible examples, because I don't like sharing horrible examples from up front, but borderline examples is murder. If you saw if you never knew what murder was, you never heard of murder, you're from some beautiful utopia type place and you didn't know what murder was, and all of a sudden you saw one human being murder another human being, guess what you would automatically know intuitively? Even if you were never taught murder is wrong, watching someone be murdered, there is something about that literally causes you to have a gut instinct, right? Research has been done on this. That doesn't matter your culture, time, or place. There are certain things that when you see, you just know that's not right. Now, over time, you can desensitize yourself to it. But initially and intuitively, there are things that we know that are just right. And we know that there are things that are just wrong. But question, who has the right to make an objective moral value? In other words, where does an objective moral value come from? How do we all have a sense of morality naturally within us as just part of our composition, right? So this is the whole premise. This is the whole concept. The thought is that because there is a God, then objective moral values do exist. In other words, if there's an objective law that we naturally follow, then it goes that there must be some objective moral law giver. There must be someone who has actually laid down the rules within us. Remember we talked about that beautiful DNA earlier? That laid down these rules within us that somehow our conscious, our minds just know some things are right and some things are wrong. Okay. Now, every law has a lawgiver, and since there is a moral law, we know this intuitively, there must be some type of moral lawgiver. It has to come from something. It can't just come from nothing. Again, you compare these two people. You might be familiar with the two people on the screen. One is Adolf Hitler, one is Mother Teresa. when you look and behold what Adolf Hitler did, you just know intuitively there's something wrong with that. There's something just not, even if you knew nothing about what was going on, you're taken from some society and stuck there to watch it like a movie in front of you, and you saw what was happening as a human being, you would know that's not right. And Mother Teresa is the opposite. If you saw her doing what she was doing and you knew nothing about anything, and you just saw her doing that, you would know there's something that is right about it. And that's the idea of having a morality, a moral conscience. The thing that we have, you cannot see, you cannot dissect. It is a component of a human being that is literally immaterial. You cannot see your morality. See your brain, but not the mind. So the human conscience. So this is J.P. Moreland. If the universe began with dead matter, having no conscience, how then do you get something totally different? Consciousness, living, thinking, feeling, believing creatures from materials that do not happen. Are you tracking his thought process? So if you believe that there was just a materialistic explosion and these stars became kind of machines that pumped out atoms that somehow formed things into existence, how is it that these unconscious materialistic things can produce conscious, feeling, believing creatures? But if everything started with the mind of God, he said, we don't have a problem with explaining the origin of our mind. So again, it's this idea of thinking back where we came from. Now, next I'm going to quote J.L. Mackie on the miracle of theism. He is an atheist, by the way. This is not a theist, not a believer, not a Christian, not a religious person at all. But he said that moral properties, this what we're talking about, this idea of having morality, constitute so odd a cluster of properties and relations that they are most unlikely to have arisen in the ordinary course of event without an all-powerful God to create. So this isn't even a Christian. This is an atheist. And he's trying to tackle this concept of theism. And for him, the biggest argument that exists is the argument of the human, the mind, the morality. Where does morality come from? It's almost impossible. It's like such an odd thing unless you believe in God. Now, then he attempts to try to explain materialistic ways of that because he is an atheist, and I'll be transparent with that. But I like his honesty. Do you appreciate his honesty there? I appreciate his honesty there in his own book that, hey, this is odd. This is hard to explain unless you believe in God. How is that remotely possible? And now I want to end with some personal testimony. Here, Paul Davies from The Mind of God says, through my scientific work, I have come to believe more and more strongly that the physical universe is put together with an ingenuity so astonishing that I cannot accept it merely as brute fact. In fact, I met a number of scientists on my journey through the sciences, to the School of Medicine, that actually became believers through their specialties in science. Yes, my chemistry teacher, one of my general chemistry, I had two different general chemistry teachers. My first one, she found God through chemistry. A biochemist I had the privilege to be tutored by found God through biochemistry. A physicist who found God through physics. It was fascinating to meet people who literally found God through their studies. Because to me, as a former atheist, I actually used to believe that if you were religious, you had committed intellectual suicide. I literally believe this. That you had a hard time coping with the reality of death and needed something to carry you through this hard life. And I saw it as what it was in my mind. A Christian asked me once, well, then what do you think you are? I said, I am a ball of chemical reaction. And one day I will become a part of the universe that I believe in. I will die and I'll go into the ground and I'll become part of the planet. I'll become a star. Who knows what I'll become? My atoms will go somewhere else. I'm just a ball of gas and biochemical reaction. And that's what I believe. And this is remarkable to find people who are intelligent, who are bright, who are brilliant, these scientists who believe in God because of their field of science. Now, Lee Strobel's not a scientist. Lee Strobel is a journalist. If you don't know Lee Strobel's story, you should look him up. I think he has a movie on Netflix, Case for Faith or something of this nature. It's like a movie on his life. It's a good movie. His books are way better than his movies, by the way. It's just way better to read it but it's a good movie for more of a watcher than a reader. Case for Faith, beautiful movie, well done. He was an atheist. He married his wife who was an atheist. One day she came home and she was a Christian. And he thought, his exact words were, the first word that came to my mind is divorce. And so he, as a journalist, he was actually an award-winning journalist. So he decided to put his abilities as a journalist to work to disprove the existence of God. Connected with the brightest minds in different fields of science, interviewed them, and his goal was to, through them, come back to his wife and say, look, I have done the thorough research. There cannot be a God based on science. At the end of his journey, after he spoke with all the different specialists, he came to one undeniable fact for himself. He came to believe that there was a God. It blew our minds, Olson said. For the first time, we began to see there were reasons behind Christianity. Deciding to believe would definitely not be committing intellectual suicide. And this is how Lee Strobel concluded his personal testimony. He said, I realize that if I were to embrace Darwinism and its underlying premise of naturalism, I would have to believe that nothing produces everything. That non-life produces life. That randomness produces fine-tuning. That chaos produces information. That unconsciousness produces consciousness. And non-reason produces reason. And I came to the same conclusion in my own research. Evolutionist, how I had been for most of my life, I would have to accept this list as it is described. And I agree with him when he said, based on this, I was forced to conclude that Darwinism would require a blind leap of faith that I was not willing to make. Remember I told you at the beginning how I hated the word faith? I hated how these Christians would say, you just have to believe, you just have to have faith. And I said, you want me to believe it just because you say it's true? And what I started to find was naturalistic believers were saying the same thing. Believe in the Darwinian concept because that's what we're telling you is true. But when I looked at the facts, when I looked at the evidence for myself, when I dug deeper into these different areas, and I looked into many more areas, but I believe these were the most important or most prominent areas, I came to one undeniable conclusion. It is more logical. It is more rational. It is more intellectually honest to believe in an intelligent designer versus random naturalistic prophet. And this was mine, like, trust me, this was hard. When I went on this investigation myself, when I came to this conclusion, please understand, this is not how I was raised. This was hard for me. Remember, I debated Christians and pulled them out of the Christian faith. This was hard for me. A lot of my friends were atheists. This was hard. On so many levels, this was hard for me because it would change my social life, could impact my economic life, impact how I live my life. And I'm sitting here in my room with all this papers and books, and you have no idea. I'm a little crazy when I research, trust me. And when I'm sitting there and I'm just thinking to myself, it appears that there is a God. And if I'm going to follow the facts where they logically lead, I'm going to have to become a theist. I didn't say a Christian, but a theist. I'm going to have to believe that there's some God out there. And I took that first step from atheism into agnosticism. there is a God. I just don't fully know who he is. But if he's there and he's intelligent, he's a thinker. If he made me, then the attributes I have, he also must have, which means he can communicate with me. And if he made this world, then he must have left clues so I can find it. Now I'm going to go find this God. And that began a new journey. There is a God. But who is he? So we looked at evidence tonight that I believe is compelling that there is, in fact, logical, rational reason to believe in an intelligent designer. And now the question is for you, when you think on the facts, when you think on the world that we live in, when you think about the precision of everything around you, is it really more logical to think that it all just happened accidentally, or that someone put it together? I want you to think about that question as you hear the words of this song.
From the highest of heights to the depths of the sea, creation revealing your majesty. From the colors of fall to the fragrance of spring, every creature unique and the song that it sings, all exclaiming, indescribable, uncontainable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. You are all-powerful, uncontainable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. Who has told every lightning bolt where it should go? Or seen heavenly storehouses laden with snow? Who imagined the sun to give source to its light, yet conceals it to bring us the coolest of night? None can fathom, indescribable, uncontainable. You taste the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. You are all-powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. You are incomparable, unchangeable. You see the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God. You are amazing, God.
The Bible says in Psalm chapter 19, verse 1 and 2, that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. In other words, that when you look up at the skies, it reveals God. He was intended to be found through the very world that he created. The Bible goes on to say, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Sounds crazy. Trust me. But that's what I told myself in my bedroom when I shook my head. And I said, this sounds crazy. But if I'm honest with the fact, someone put this all thing together. This was not composed by stars as machines producing atoms. A conscious, intelligent, intentional person, being, did this. And I want to know who he is. I hope based on tonight's presentation that you could at least see, maybe for the first time, or maybe just reaffirm what you already believe. Maybe for the first time to give you evidence for what you believe. That there is a logical, rational reason to actually believe in God, an intelligent designer. And if it's your first time seeing this, I hope that tonight, with an honest mind, you will think on these things. Again, I don't want you to believe it because I said it. I want you to come and let us reason together. You have questions, come talk with me. I love to talk with you. Come and let us reason together. Think on these things. Weigh up the evidence for yourself. Wrestle with these concepts and see if the evidence doesn't lead you where it led me and many other scientists, many other people who are strong atheists, who have come to the same conclusion because the evidence took us there. That's my challenge for you tonight. Give it an open, honest chance. Not to be a Christian, but just to think on an intelligent creator. That you guys willing to take on that challenge? At least think about it, amen? Amen. And tomorrow night, we got something special planned. Tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, we're continuing every night, except for next Thursday, every night. Which God was it? Which God did I find? I went on a journey. And I did it the same way I did the first journey. I said, let's look for the fact. Let's look for the evidence. Let's look for the clearest, logical, rational things that exist out there. Because if he's there, he left clues so we can find him. Tomorrow night at 7, I want to share with you the God that I found. And the evidence, more importantly, the evidence that led me. I'm going to come back tomorrow night. Amen? Father, thank you for the chance to share some thoughts with my friends. I know we got some things to think about tonight. I know we got some things to chew on tonight. But I pray that they would find an intelligent designer like I did. Help them as they reason with these things. And guide them. Because if you're there, then you intend for them to find it. Help us all to find it. Amen. Thank you again for coming out to the Revelation of Love Bible Prophecy Seminar. Again, we have some great presentations coming up. Tomorrow we are tackling the question, which God did I find? And I'm going to share more of a personal testimony, and I'm going to share what I found. And then we're going to tackle the age-old question that if there is a God out there, if there is a God, especially of love, if there is an intentional designer, then why is there pain and suffering in our world? Why are there bad things that happen to good people? And why are there good things that happen to bad people? We're going to tackle that next because that was a huge question that I had to wrestle with. And then our following evening, Monday at 7 o'clock, we're going to be talking about Revelation's Lamb. What is the hope for the confusion and the pain in the world today? Yes, sir. Yes, 6 p.m. That's what the flyer says, correct? Yes, so 6 p.m. We'll meet night after night, 6 p.m. as we continue the Revelation of Love Bible Prophecy Seminar. So again, thank you for coming out. We hope to see you tomorrow night at 6 p.m. We have refreshments. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow night at 6 p.m. I'll hand it over to Pastor Soda.
We want to say thank you to Anthony tonight. Amen. So I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening for our first night for our evangelistic campaign. I'm really excited about it. This is the first time we've done a campaign, and I know it's been a while, right? So after right now, we have refreshments over there in the fellowship hall. Don't forget to invite people. So if you have any friends here in town or near where you live, I know some of you, not all of you live here in Coolidge, but from wherever you guys live, invite people, invite friends. And if you do invite somebody, then you both get a prize. Is that correct? Did I say that right? Yeah, you both get a prize if you bring a guest. And of course, every guest that comes does get something, right? So once again, thank you for coming out for night one. We will see you guys again tomorrow evening. I will be in Oracle Church tomorrow morning, but tomorrow evening I will be here and we will continue with our program. So thank you all and have a blessed rest of your night.